Hey everyone, I'm Justin Spicer from the Legal Aid Society of Columbus, and I'm here with Megan Sullivan, Director for the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic at the Legal Aid Society of Columbus, Ryan Sander, Staff Attorney with LASC, Melissa Skilleter, Director of the LITC of Southeastern Ohio Legal Services, and Shanna Mustard, Staff Attorney with Souls. Today we're discussing the connection between domestic violence and tax. Feel free to comment below and we'll answer whatever questions we can. First, before we get started, a safety notice. Safety is very important. Be aware that no internet communication is 100% secure. If you're using a device that others can access, please remember to delete the history after exiting. This presentation will be recorded and available on Facebook to view later. So please make sure that you are viewing this from a safe place at a safe time. And quickly, a trigger warning. We are going to be talking about domestic violence. Some issues may create an emotional response for survivors of violence. Megan, can you start us off?
Yes, Ryan, can you tell us what you mean when we say domestic violence?
Sure. So domestic violence takes a lot of different forms. It can be physical violence, it can be verbal threats of abuse, it can be mental violence, it can be emotional violence, and it can be financial violence. Most people, when they think about domestic violence, they think about it in terms of, direct physical harm or threats to cause physical harm. But even before we see violence like that, can often come in warning signs like emotional violence and mental abuse and financial abuse. Sort of like where there's smoke, there's fire in terms of continuing indications of further abuse and degrees of harm. These different forms of domestic violence are used to gain power and control over the individual and are continuing to be used throughout the relationship.
Today, we're going to focus on financial abuse. Shanna, can you give us some examples of what that means?
Sure. It's usually seen as like hiding money, hiding or controlling the mail, controlling all of the money in a relationship, denying access to bank accounts, really restrictive allowances, really closely monitoring financial accounts and routine small purchases, interfering with a person's job, keeping a food stamp or debit card and using all the money for themselves and not for the family, forcing someone through threats and manipulation to pay their debts, ruining someone's credit, or even taking out credit in their name. There's a lot of ways that abusers find to financially abuse someone.
Ryan, what specifically do you see regarding tax matters with your clients?
Yeah, so a lot of times my clients don't have a full understanding of even their current finances, recent filings for taxes, and a lack of access to information and records.
Shanna, how does that come about? What does it look like for the survivor?
So it usually happens through self-e-filing, online tax filing, forging e-file permission, return preparers who don't follow the rules on making sure that both parties are granting permission to e-file, forcing the other person to sign the permission to e-file or the paper return. For a lot of people, their tax refund is the biggest amount of money that they get at one time. So it's often the target of financial abusers.
Ryan, does this ever happen with non-married couples?
It does. Sometimes we see unmarried parents and this issue come about with who claims the children. After separation, one partner may rush to file a tax return claiming the children, even though they aren't the parent that is legally entitled to do so. Abusers have this sense of entitlement that they can use their control to manipulate the tax filings of their partners, whether this is access to the refund money or through direct deposit, claiming the children themselves, or forcing their partner to give them the refund money.
Melissa, when do you recommend that someone look into these tax issues?
When people don't know what's on their tax returns at all, or even if a return has been filed, they should take a look at it. If one spouse wasn't given access to the tax refund money at all, particularly in cases where it was one spouse used a chunk of money for purposes that went outside the family. We're not talking about, one spouse who pays the household bills. We're sort of talking about someone who squirrels money away and doesn't use it for the benefit of the family. And also when there's a tax debt, anyone should get a better idea of what's going on with their issue and look into their options for dealing with it. We'll talk a little bit more later about how you might do that.
Yeah, and how can someone get more information about their tax filings and their tax records?
There are a few options. You can get information directly from the IRS by creating an account at irs.gov to request your transcripts and review your information online. Transcripts from the IRS can show you your filing history, filing status on returns, the reported adjusted gross income and withholding and credits that you claimed on a return, and whether or not there's a tax due. You can also get transcripts that show a line-by-line report of the tax returns filed for the current and 3 most recent years. And you can get wage and income transcripts that show the wages and other income reported under your Social Security number for the last 6 to 10 years. When you create your transcript account or your irs.gov account, you're going to need to verify your identity, though, using a cell phone. So if you think texts from the IRS or ID.me or emails would be a problem for you because of safety, keep that in mind when you're choosing whether or not to go with that option. Other options include requesting your tax records from the actual tax preparer if you know who that was, because you should be able to get access to those records from the tax preparer since you're named on the taxes. Although make sure that they're not going to be someone who's going to share the information that you were requesting them. You can also request transcripts by calling the IRS, but they're going to send the transcripts to the address that's on file for you for the IRS. So that may in fact be with the person who you filed the tax return with. So that should be kind of a last resort. If none of those are good options because of privacy and safety concerns, you can reach out to a low-income taxpayer clinic or another tax professional because they may be able to help you access that information without causing those concerns.
Well, and how can domestic violence affect the tax return filing process for people?
A joint return belongs to both spouses. They both have equal responsibility for the information that's in the return and for verifying that it's accurate to the IRS. So both spouses should have access to the information that's being provided on the return and the ability to decide how the return is created. In a relationship with violence, one partner typically controls the process and the information without giving the other partner the necessary access to ensure the return is accurate, or doesn't allow a space in which the partner would feel safe challenging that other partner about inaccuracies in the return.
Megan, what happens when there is debt on a joint account?
Well, the IRS is going to collect from both spouses on a joint tax return debt, even after they're divorced. They're going to start by sending collection notices, which are demands for payments. And they'll also, once they are able to collect a tax, they're going to take any tax refund that is claimed and apply it to that debt. That means that if the survivor has custody of the children, they could be filing returns with large refunds because of child-related tax credits. Those refunds will then be applied to the past due debts unless the taxpayer takes some steps to prevent that. And so that means the survivor is going to end up paying off the bulk of the debts in a lot of situations. And then when the IRS is sending the collection notices, if they don't get a response, they're going to escalate their action up to threatening a levy, which is like a garnishment of wages, benefits, or bank accounts. And so it's really normal for people who get IRS notices to feel nervous and put them in a drawer somewhere to deal with later because the IRS seems pretty scary. And you're not alone if you've done that, but it's really better to respond to the notices because there are options to deal with those debts and you're going to be in a better situation.
And then what can someone do if the IRS starts collecting on that joint debt?
Well, there are collection alternatives if you can't afford to pay. A collection alternative is basically anything that's an alternative to paying the debt in full right now. They include currently not collectible status if paying the tax debt would result in a hardship. In this status, the IRS isn't going to collect from you, but it also won't stop the offset of the tax refund. There are also options to challenge the underlying debt. If you didn't know about it or you didn't have the ability to examine or question the return because of fear, you should discuss innocent spouse relief with a tax professional or review the information at irs.gov. There's a form 8857 and the instructions to that are pretty clear. That's the form that you use to request what's called innocent spouse relief. And you request that if your spouse or former spouse improperly reported items or didn't include all of the income on a return, or they reported a tax debt that they didn't pay. And you can challenge that if it would be unfair to make you pay the debt based on a variety of factors. And one of those is domestic violence, one of the factors that the IRS will look at. It's a good idea to contact a low-income taxpayer clinic to talk through those issues, but you can also look at the form on your own at the irs.gov website.
What if the abusers continue to claim the children when the survivor should be able to claim the kids?
One of the things you can do is file as early in the tax filing season as possible. So in any given year, that would be around the end of January or early February. See if you can get your return in first, which would allow you to file electronically. If you don't get there first, an electronic return would be rejected by the IRS if the child's social security number had already been claimed by another person. In that case, the parent who should be able to claim the child can print out the return and mail in a paper return to the IRS. This is going to take longer, of course, but it does protect your claim. Later, they may need to prove to the IRS where the child lived in order to defend the refund that they have claimed. If the IRS sends a notice requesting proof supporting your claim of a child, a person should make sure to respond to the IRS with the requested information in a timely manner. Low-income taxpayer clinics can help with this type of issue, as well as other tax practitioners. If an abuser is violating a court order, it may be possible to seek a contempt order against the abuser and require them to stop making that claim.
And I've seen this more in my practice, probably because of the stimulus money from the last few years, but what if the abuser claims the survivor on a return without their permission?
Yeah, the extra money from the stimulus and from the child tax credits led to a lot of extra unwarranted tax filings. If you find out that your partner has filed a return with you on it before the filing deadline, so in a normal year, that would be April 15th. If you find that out before, you can just go ahead and mail in a paper separate return that will replace the joint return on file. If you want to prevent it in the future, you can either get in the habit of filing your separate return every year as soon as you possibly can when the filing season opens, or you can apply to the IRS for something called an IP PIN or an identity protection PIN that you include on your tax return so that no one can claim you on a return without your knowledge and permission, because then that number has to be on the return itself. Always keep your address up to date with the IRS though, so because you would need to get that new PIN every year, and if you don't have the PIN, you can't file either. Then if you find out after the filing deadline that a return's been filed with you on it without your permission, you can still file your own separate return and try to prove to the IRS that the other person did not have your permission and that should not be your return. That's a little bit trickier, a little bit harder standard to meet. So if you at all possibly can, challenge it during the tax year or do that preventative measure with the IP PIN.
And then one issue that comes up, every so often on some of my cases, Megan, is, talking about the difference between claiming a child as a dependent versus taking the earned income credit. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Yes, it's a tricky issue because there is some overlap in terms of the qualifications to claim either of those things, in terms of the child being related to you or and sometimes living with you. However, the dependency exemption can be bargained for in a divorce or custody agreement. The parties can agree to allow the non-residential parent to claim their children as a dependent, and certain credits go with that dependent exemption, like the child tax credit and the recent stimulus payments. The earned income credit, though, always stays with the parent with whom the children live for more than 6 months of the year.
Okay, thanks everyone for listening. Be sure to join us on May 20th when we talk about responding to notices about earned income tax credit examinations. Thanks everyone.